Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us again on another great seminar series discussion. I am Carlos Bosquez, CEO of FASI, and it is exciting to have another great discussion today. At FASI, our focus is to understand, translate, and intervene with food allergies. And one of the key questions that it's really driving our research is why has there been such a rapid increase in food allergies over the last decades? As you remember, in September, we introduced our new seminar series that we call Project Safe, the impact of chemicals in food and the environment. And through this series, we have had the opportunity to have several great speakers and discussions about the impact of the environment and diets in on human health, and especially how the evolution of the environment and the diet that we are consuming could have an impact on human health, especially in the development of allergic diseases. So today I am thrilled to have Dr. Andrew Wang joining us in this discussion. And to be completely transparent, this topic that we have started in September for this seminar series, a lot of it has been inspired by the incredible work that Dr. Andrew Wang has been doing as part of being a FASI investigator. So Dr. Andrew Wang is a FASI principal investigator, but he's also an associate professor of internal medicine, of rheumatology, especially and allergy and immunology at Yale University. And he has made great clinical and scientific contributions to the fields of autoimmunity, of autoimmune diseases, and especially his lab focuses on understanding how the environment impacts the trajectory of inflammatory diseases to help discover pathways that can be therapeutically targeted, hopefully to treat the diseases. Specifically with FOSSI, Dr. Wan has focused on understanding how chemicals we ingest or are exposed to act as allergenic adjuvants, and that is agents that can enhance the immune system. Specifically, Dr. Wan's lab hypothesizes that these adjuvants may be in part responsible for allergic sensitization and connecting it back to the question that FASI is so committed to answer. Why has there been such an incredible increase in food allergies over the last decades? So before I pass it on to Dr. Wong, I'd like to remind everyone that we'll take questions in the Q&A box at the end. So please feel free to submit your questions throughout the discussion. So Andrew, it's an honor to have you here. I really, as I said, we've been really inspired by your work to the point that we decided to do a full seminar series on this topic. And I'm a big admirer of the work that you do, but also how you connect that to your personal life. So I will I will stop there and I'll let you share with our audience a little bit more about your work and how has that impacted also the way you go about your daily life.
Thank you, Carlos, for that very kind introduction. And I'm especially grateful to FASI, Dr. Olson, Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Medstov, and everyone at FASI for supporting this work, because otherwise it would not have been possible. And I'm very humbled that it has inspired this series. So what I wanted to share with the group today was how we got into this. And we started off with a pretty simple question, which is to try to understand the chemicals that are in food. And this, I can see that from in the lecture series, many people are thinking about the same problem. And we went about it in a very simplistic way, which is this is how how we used to get food. And in some places, primarily in rural places, and this will become important later, this is how folks still get food from the land. And it looks very different than how we get food now, and in particular, how we get food in urban areas, which you can see is really not in any remote way similar to how we used to get our food. And so when we think about natural chemicals in the food, in the example on the left with the cow in the stream, the basic idea is that we had to evolve and develop ways to eat that food so that we would be fed without being poisoned by natural chemicals that are found in this example, plants and fungi and other things that we like to eat. And another way of looking at this is that plants have also evolved and developed ways to make chemicals that deter animals from wanting to eat them. So I thought I'd go through a couple of examples here just to kind of really inspire the point. And the question is basically to the audience, can I eat this? So on the very left, we have this delicious looking mushroom. For the mushroom aficionados in the audience, you may know that there is a kind of mushroom that one ought not to eat, which is called death cap. And this is a pretty common cause during mushroom gathering season of ICU, intensive care unit admission, and it causes pretty bad liver failure. And we don't really have a way of dealing with this clinically. In the middle, for the gardeners and for the Agatha Christie fans, this is nightshade or belladonna. And if you ingest this in high enough quantities, it can cause changes in the way you think and in the way that your heart works. There's a very famous series, short story series in Agatha Christie where she describes this person who went mad and died and said, well, the symptoms could be consistent with nightshade. And then the last example here, which is particularly important to our discussion today, is the willow tree. And if you ingest too much of this, the bark or parts of this plant, you get all of these problems that I listed here below. The really important point here I want to point out is that we have taken these chemicals and have really weaponized them in a way that's beneficial for human health. So in other words, these chemicals interact with our biology, and we can manipulate those chemicals in a way that can beneficially affect our physiology. So for example, amanitin on the very left is being developed as a cancer drug. Atropine, you've probably heard of, is really, really important if your heart's going too slow. And probably the vast majority of us have consumed medications like aspirin and ibuprofen, which is derived from the willow tree on the very right. All right, how about in modern processed foods? So the example of the grocery store on the right. When we started thinking about this, we thought we would just look at water because there should be one ingredient in water, right? So you can go on the FDA website yourself. I've put the link up there. You can look at it. This is all the food additives that you can add to stuff that the FDA regulates in terms of consumption. And same question, can I eat this? And this is what the FDA is. If you go to the website, you'll find this page. This is all the stuff that you can add into water to boil. And you'll see there's very interesting kind of caveats here. If the steam touches the water, if the steam touches the food, except if it's milk or not. And half of these things, I would argue we don't really know what they do. Maybe most of them we don't know what they do, unlike with the examples I gave you from natural chemicals before. Okay, so hopefully I've kind of made a case for the fact that we have the hardware to deal with chemicals in food because this is how we evolved, and that there are unknown chemicals now in modern food. So what's the evidence that there's connections between the chemicals in the food and food allergy? A lot of it's epidemiological. One is the very simple observation that the places where there's the most increase in food allergy or the most food allergy in general are industrialized countries. And so you'll see very few countries there that have high prevalences of food allergy that are less developed and modernized. And particularly compelling evidence comes from looking within countries, within, in this case, one country, and then looking at, for example, the positivity of skin prick tests for food allergy or any allergen, and to look in urban areas versus in rural areas of the same country. And you can see that the rate for a positive skin prick test is much, much lower, whether you measure it at 1 millimeter or 3 millimeter in the rural folks versus the urban folks. And this has been reproduced across many countries. I'm just giving you one example here. And then as Carlos alluded to in his introduction, the increase in food allergy really is a modern phenomenon. So Professor Platt-Mills very nicely kind of shows the evolution of our of the prevalence of all of these allergic diseases, including food allergy. And they're really all post 1900 and really post around 1950 or so. And in recent revisiting of this epidemiological data on the right, it now accounts for 1 in 5 or more children that now have food allergy, whereas if you go all the way back to the 1990s, that was much, much lower. And if you go back to the 50s, it was virtually non-existent. I want to point out here that many of you may have heard of the hygiene hypothesis, which is what Tom is pointing out here on the left. But we also noticed that, this is around the time when folks started adding into the marketplace things like aspirin and ibuprofen. That was in the turn of the century. And you'll remind yourself that urban areas are highly concentrated in drugstores and convenience stores where such over-the-counter medicines can be procured. And then in the 1940s, in an attempt to increase the shelf life of many foods, preservatives such as BHA and TBHQ were introduced into modern foods so that the bread can last on the shelf forever, or the Cheez-Its can last in the box forever, and so forth. And then finally, and this should be pretty intuitive and not very controversial, pretty much every study that's looked at whether or not consumption of ultra-processed foods is associated with pick your bad outcome, medical outcome of choice, in this case, food allergies, has found a strong correlation between the consumption of ultra-processed food and bad health outcomes, including food allergies, which is what I'm showing here. This is a fairly recent study. Okay, so I think we've covered now kind of the evolutionary basis of chemicals and how they interact with our physiology. I think we've done a pretty good job kind of looking at the evidence from epidemiology of making a case that this could be something that could be explaining the rise in food allergies. And then the remaining question here is, well, how does it work? What's the biology of this? And if we understand this, how can we use this to our advantage to eventually get rid of food allergies in our societies? And so I'll try to explain this pretty intuitively, but one way is our body defends us from dangerous chemicals is through our brain, our neurological memory, right? So for example, if you tasted or saw or smelled something like this, but nothing happened, this could be like a candy, right? Something that has wintergreen taste, a little bit bitter, and you may have had a pleasant or a neutral memory to this. Then the next time you encounter this same thing, you'll be like, okay, well, maybe I can taste this again. But imagine if you consumed a lot of willow bark, and then you got some of the toxicity that you can see with taking too much ibuprofen, for example, and it was a really bad experience. Then your brain will contextualize the sight, the smell, the taste as something that's bad. And so the next time you get this, you see this, you're probably going to stay away from it. And that's how neurologic memory works. Well, how about things that you can't smell or look at or taste, right? So this is immunologic memory. And here I have a bacteria just as a reference, but the immune system works in a pretty much the identical way as the nervous system with regards to how it remembers things that are good or bad. Put simply, if the immune system sees an antigen, and this refers to one of your own proteins, so self proteins, or in the case of food allergy, a food protein like peanut protein or egg protein or any of these other kinds of not dangerous proteins that are in food that we were somehow able to tolerate without getting food allergies for a couple thousand years, then the immune system's default as it goes down the gut is that this is something that probably is good for nutrition. We can extract calories from this and nutrients. This is good, it's safe. And so the immune system tolerates this antigen. And the same thing with self-antigens. On the other hand, if you see the same antigen, so I'm using here spike protein just because everybody understands how this would work. If you gave spike protein by itself, like if you gave self protein or a food protein by itself, the immune system will tolerate this because it's not contextualized as being dangerous. And so in order for vaccines to work, and in order for our immune systems to work against Listeria, the bug on the left, there has to be other stuff. And so this would be bacterial components or added compounds or things that in immunology we generally refer to as adjuvants. So the simplest way of thinking about this is that it contextualizes the antigen in which it's with as something that's dangerous. And that combination then makes us remember that this is something bad, and we form antibodies to this. And the next time we see it, we have immunologic responses. So in the case of food allergy, this can be gastrointestinal distress, or in the worst case, anaphylaxis. And so we asked a pretty simple question, which is bringing back again Tom's kind of timeline of the rise in allergies. Is it possible that this stuff that became more and more prevalent in urban, industrialized, modern societies could have such an adjuvant property, especially if you consider the fact that it's always consumed with food, right? So your doctor always tells you if you're going to take ibuprofen or medications like this, you can't take it on an empty stomach, right? Because as you read from the side effects of taking too much willow bark or aspirin or ibuprofen, it can ulcerate your stomach. And so we asked a very simple question, which is, can you take an antigen, and here we're using mouse models, and give it any number of FDA-approved industrial compounds, which generally are referred to as xenobiotics. So we screened many of them, including things like BHA and TBHQ. We also screened over-the-counter medications, and then asked the simple question, now, does the animal still tolerate the egg protein, or will the animal develop immune memory to it? And then the next time it's exposed to that same protein, will it develop an anaphylactic response? And the short answer to that is that we indeed found a set of food preservatives and also over-the-counter medications that do just this. And importantly, the dose of the antigen matters. So how much of the protein is there matters. How much of the adjuvant is there matters. And the timing of the two matters. So they have to be associated in the same way that when you learn something, the context needs to be associated with the thing that you're trying to learn. And so all of those things matter. If any of these things don't work out in kind of just the right way, there is no memory formed to that particular food. And so we've been working on this for 4 or 5 years now, and what it's allowed us to do is do a couple of things. One is that we actually found new ways that old medications were thought to work. So in the example I'm giving you on the left, which is work that would not have been possible without FOSSI's support, we found that actually, a lot of these medications like ibuprofen, this whole family of medications, can be further divided into those that have activity that was previously not described before that can be beneficial. So this activates, for example, in our case, an antioxidant pathway that makes some NSAIDs better in some ways than in others. And this is directly related, as you can see, with ongoing work, which we hope to be out in the public domain very, very soon, where we find that the same kind of machinery here, biological machinery, is involved in detecting these kind of adjuvant property containing xenobiotics, and in this way contextualizing the memory of the food in which it was with which it was consumed, and thus form food allergy. So the main point here is that this is really a protective physiologic defense against eating stuff that probably isn't good for you, that I would argue dates all the way back to the time when we had to decide if the bush or the berry or the piece of meat was something we ought to eat, and not something totally new in our biology. So the next steps for us, having found a few of these, is, well, how many are there, and do they all work the same way that we've described here? We have some evidence that they may work in other ways, and we don't know what ways they might be. And we haven't comprehensively looked at all of the food additives. If you go on the FDA website, there are thousands of them, and we haven't screened them all. We are very interested in understanding the basic biology, kind of the design here for how we sense chemical danger. So chemicals that have properties that can damage us, how are those detected by us? Because as we discussed, if it's in with the food, sometimes you can't see it, smell it, taste it, etc. And then obviously from a therapeutic perspective, how do we manipulate these fundamental pathways in a way that can help us prevent food allergies? And then, like with memories over time, are there ways that we can help the immune system forget these kind of inappropriate responses to food? And that's kind of the ongoing scientific work in my laboratory and in many of the other laboratories in the FOSSI group. The next step in my personal life is to expand the farm further. So currently we have 3 species, and we're trying to get to a point where we can grow all of the food that we eat. And it's been a real adventure and joy to share this with my children. So you have my youngest daughter up here with Dr. McChicken, and we lambed very recently. So here's a lamb a couple of hours after it was born. We actually lambed again yesterday. Carlos, I forgot to mention that. And then, yeah, and with this, I'm very, very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Andrew. Really, really great to first to hear, especially excited to hear about to see the publication, all that nice work, hopefully translated soon into a publication that people can get access to. Actually, before I get into questions, people always ask us how can we help, and when we say, we're a nonprofit organization, so donate, join us in this seminars, but also host events and follow us in social media, and really become part of the FASI community. Through your help, really is how we can make this happen. And as a reminder, our next seminar will be with Dr. Tim Moran from North Carolina School of Medicine. We'll be talking more about not the food that we consume, but the environment having an impact on this sensitization. So, Andrew, excited to see the amazing work, especially really looking forward to those publications, because one of the challenges that I think we face in this topic is there's so much non-scientifically backed data or information, I would say, out there, and it really dilutes the science and the strong information and data that is generated to support this effect. So I'm really excited to see that. Thank you for sharing information about your family. You're a guy that really can say you put your money where your mouth is. Is that how they call it? So I really like where that you guys are really doing that in your farm. I'll take a few questions here. Some first person is asking, did you read? There was a New York Times article on Sunday talking about how raw milk can decrease allergies but expose kids to harmful diseases. And what would be your thoughts? I don't know if you've read it, but if you have any thoughts on that, would be great.
I'm assuming that this is the piece that relates to Tom Platzmill's work, which the graph that I had shown of the epidemiology is from the same gentleman. I think, Carlos, as you pointed out, food science is probably still in its very, very early phases in terms of true understanding of how the chemicals within food interact with our physiology, how it actually interacts with us. And I think a very good example of this is that slide I had where you had the mushroom and the plant and the tree, and you can see that obviously ibuprofen and aspirin are good drugs in certain contexts, and in other contexts they can be very, very bad because they interact with our physiology in a very important way. And I would say that in general, for dietary things like the participant is asking, the context is always really important. And so, I think to your point earlier, I think we need to be careful about saying blanket generalized statements about this is bad and this is good universally, because that's probably not how it works.
Yeah, no, I see this not only in actual ad, right? You talk about food. I know you're doing an amazing work also on more on the skin and how access to, multiple signals that could come together. And sometimes you talk about what we consume. So I'm wondering also what we put on our bodies. What is your opinion about that as well? What are your thoughts about because I know in the personal care business,
Yeah.
there's a lot more regulations in Europe than the United States. Any thoughts on that?
That's a great question. So Tim will probably talk more about this next week. But certainly the way that people think about how food allergy can be acquired nowadays is primarily through the skin because of the strong associations between skin conditions like eczema and atopic dermatitis and food allergy. And so there is uh, there is a lot of evidence and a very real scientific possibility that encountering the peanut allergen or whatever food allergen one becomes allergic to at the skin where there's damage is how the immune system then contextualizes that as being dangerous. And so certainly if you're putting chemicals that have biological activity on the skin, and for example, some of the ones that we identified in the food, those same pathways are stimulated by certain chemicals that can be placed in skincare products. One can imagine that that could happen. Whether or not that does happen, I think requires actual scientific and rigorous kind of testing before we make overgeneralized conclusions, which is, I think, probably the most dangerous.
Yeah, no, and I like, what you're doing and some of our other principal investigators like Kerry Soko and Isaac Shu are looking into the skin. So one connected question here by Hannah. How can we explain the rising prevalence of food allergies in infants who have not been exposed to processed foods or extensive medication, but react to an allergen the very first time they try it, just a few months old? Has anyone studied the doses of adjuvants coming through breast milk, and could that be a factor?
Yeah, it's a great question. We actually looked into this with ibuprofen, for example. Certain xenobiotics can get into breast milk, and so remember that in kind of the first year of life, mom and baby are still one unit. Just the arrangement is a little bit different, where the baby is not inside. But through breast milk and touch and all of these other kind of really important things, the baby and the mom are still one unit. And so it's absolutely possible that stuff can get into breast milk. There is already very good literature, I think, from some of our FOSI investigators, also Wayne Schreffler at MGH and others, looking at kind of what's in breast milk, whether or not the kind of the germs that live on our skin or in our guts may have an impact on the effect of formula, which is I would consider processed food, have on this. And so this work in patients is actively underway.
Thank you. Andrew, and I'll do the last question we have here. We have 2 minutes left. Great question by Megan here. Are you researching any allergy incidents, reducing factors like exposure to pet dogs?
Exposure to
To pets, to dogs, to pets that you have in your house.
so there's a pretty rich literature here on kind of the difference between living in kind of farm type settings with animals and not. We are not actively studying this, but there is I would advise Megan to look via Google or anything else that this has been very well studied in terms of early exposure, and in particular with the question of pets, of early exposure in different settings. And so I think the short answer is I don't know if we know exactly how this works, but I think with the support of FOSI and other organizations interested in solving this problem, we'll get to the bottom of it.
Thank you, Andrew. And I really like your answers because to the earlier point, right? I think unfortunately and unfortunately, some of these things are associations and people talk about, food is health and but there's very limited data. And I think part of our responsibility as scientists is to really provide the critical data that it's needed to better understand, to have a very clear support so that then we can actually find answers to it and solutions. So I really appreciate the work you're doing, and thank you for taking the time today for a great talk.
Carlos, thanks very much. And I do just want to end with, this is a proof of principle study that we did in mice, and we're making, as you're pointing out, making no claims in what could be happening in humans. And I guess to close this by going back to the first question, look, farmers and a lot of folks have been drinking raw milk for generations. And so we'll see what happens.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. Have a great day.
Much.
Bye-bye.